He had 17 minutes to save his family from losing everything, and in the final 60 seconds, a stranger shattered his plan. One lost woman, one worn photograph, one impossible choice: get on the bus to the job interview that could end his family's eviction, or stop and help someone no one else would even see. Most people wouldn't have looked twice, but Evan Mercer did. And by missing that bus, he didn't just change a life. He avoided death, rewrote his future, and uncovered a truth most of us are too busy to notice. Sometimes the biggest miracles hide in the smallest interruptions. This isn't just a story of kindness. It's a story of fate, failure, and a decision that would shake a city. So the question is, what would you have done? He only had 17 minutes to save everything he loved, and he almost made it. Not from a bullet, not from a fire, but from something far more mundane and far more relentless: life. That's the irony that hits you hardest when fate flips the script. You spend your time chasing a single opportunity, and just when it's within reach, you're forced to decide between the future you've been fighting for and a stranger's desperate plea for help. Most people wouldn't stop. Most people would think, "I'm sorry, I can't," and rush on. But not Evan Mercer. That morning, Evan didn't just miss his bus. He missed the one bus that was never supposed to arrive. And in doing so, he saved not just someone else's life, but his own. If you think this is just another inspirational story, think again. What happened that day will challenge everything you believe about failure, fate, and the true cost of kindness. So before you scroll away, ask yourself, what would you have done in his shoes? Because Evan had only seconds to decide. And those seconds made all the difference. Evan Mercer had been out of work for 3 months, not by choice. His construction firm folded overnight corporate restructuring, they called it. For Evan, a 42-year-old foreman with a wife and 8-year-old daughter, it meant more than just a layoff. It meant panic attacks at midnight, unopened bills piling up like bricks, and a growing sense of failure he couldn't shake. That morning he had one shot at turning it all around. A job interview at Ashland and Brightwell Construction, the only firm hiring in his trade that didn't require a 4-year degree or a buddy on the inside. It wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline. If he landed it, he could stop eviction proceedings and put food on the table without borrowing money from relatives who already viewed him as the one who never quite got ahead. He didn't tell Claire, his wife, just how desperate it had gotten. She had her hands full waiting tables on double shifts. Their daughter, Emily, only saw Dad as the guy who made the best pancakes, not the man who'd spent the past few nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd failed his family beyond repair. Evan's alarm never rang. His phone had died during the night, likely thanks to a loose charger. He jolted upright, checked the clock. 7 a.m. interview at 8 o'clock. Bus ride, 45 minutes. He was already too close to the edge. The bathroom faucet coughed up nothing but air. The apartment building's pipes had burst again, 3rd time in 6 months. No shower, no shave, no water to even slick his hair. He grabbed a half-empty water bottle from the fridge and scrubbed his face as best he could, soaking his shirt in the process. The mirror didn't lie. He looked like a man on the verge. Wrinkled shirt, damp collar, stubble too long to be fashionable, and eyes that hadn't rested in days. He tore through drawers hunting for his keys, losing 8 precious minutes before. He found them buried under final notice letters on the kitchen counter. He ran the 6 blocks to the bus stop, dodging commuters with polished shoes and purpose, while he looked like he'd slept in a ditch. The corner store clerk gave him side-eye when he asked to use the bathroom. He bought a cup of coffee out of guilt, burned his tongue sipping it, and stared at himself in the cracked mirror behind the paper towel dispenser. This wasn't just bad luck. It was a parade of humiliations. And the last float hadn't passed yet. He reached the bus stop. With 3 minutes to spare. The 8:05 was coming. He could hear it before he saw it. It was his chance to reclaim dignity, to be the man his daughter thought he was. Then, out of nowhere, an elderly woman in a faded purple coat approached him with tears in her eyes. Her name was Nora Ellison, and she was lost. She clutched a weathered photograph like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. Nora Ellison, mid-70s, thinning white hair tucked under a misshapen sun hat, hands shaking as she held out the picture. "This is my son," she said. Softly, almost apologetically, as if asking for directions was a crime. "He had surgery yesterday. I promised I'd be there when he woke up, but I think I'm lost." The bus was now a block away, the unmistakable growl of diesel cutting. Through the morning haze, Evan glanced at his watch-useless dead battery. He knew the hospital she meant, Riverside General, 15 blocks east. The wrong direction. Everything inside him screamed no, not today. "Not now, ma'am," he started, unsure how to end. The sentence, every second, stretched like glue. Could he scribble directions fast enough? Could she even remember them? And what if he told her the wrong street and she wandered off further? The hospital wasn't easy to find without landmarks. He looked at her again, red-rimmed eyes, trembling lips, a voice barely holding back tears. Everyone else passed her, like she didn't exist. That's what broke him. Not the fear of missing the interview, but the fear of becoming like everyone else. He saw in her the mother he'd once watched struggle with early-onset dementia, saw the moments when the world made no sense to her and no one had time to help. He couldn't be another face that failed to stop. "Come on," Evans said. "I'll walk you there." It was like a switch flipped. Nora grasped his arm tightly, grateful but confused, and Evan turned away from the curb just as the bus hissed to a stop. He saw the doors open, passengers file in, the driver glance at him with a neutral expression. Then the doors closed. Just like that, the future he thought he was chasing drove off into traffic, and he was left behind with a stranger. Most people would say that was stupid. Irresponsible, even. But that's the trick about life. It doesn't always reward the responsible choice. Sometimes the universe plays a longer game, and you won't see the pattern until you're halfway through it. Evan didn't know that yet. All he knew was that the weight in his chest, the pressure, the failure, the gnawing self-loathing felt just a little lighter as they walked together down Roosevelt Street. Nora talked as they walked, between breaths and glances at street signs. She told him about her son, Marcus, who'd built a local security systems company from scratch. About how proud she was that he'd never taken a dime from anyone to do it. About how he'd been in a car accident the week before and needed surgery on his spine. She called him my miracle boy. Evan listened, nodding, encouraging. The hospital came into view like a lighthouse on the horizon. He watched. Nora's posture shift when she saw the red brick building. Her pace quickened. Her grip on his arm tightened. She whispered, "Thank you," and gave him a hug that somehow felt heavier than it should have. Then she walked through the hospital's automatic doors and vanished inside. And just like that, Evan was alone again. Interview missed. Opportunity lost. The familiar dread returned, cold and swift, like water seeping into his shoes. How would he tell Claire? Would she understand? Could she? He wandered to a bench across the street, sat down, and stared at his useless phone. It was dead, just like the future he'd planned. Then, like a movie plot too strange to believe, something flickered on the digital transit board near the curb. Breaking news. Bus 316 plunges off Riverside. Bridge, multiple casualties feared. Evan's heart stopped. 316. That was his bus. The one he missed by seconds. The one that had just taken 17 people, 17 souls to the river below. For a long, breathless moment, Evan couldn't move. His brain tried to catch up with what his eyes were seeing: images of first responders, flashing lights, a mangled chunk of metal hunched at the edge of the river like a wounded animal. Bus 316, his bus, the same route, the same time. It had veered off Riverside Bridge and fallen 40 feet down into the water. The report confirmed what he already knew in his bones: multiple injuries, possible fatalities, 17 passengers. He would have been number 18. His legs turned to rubber. He stood slowly, mechanically, as if fearing the act of motion would wake him up into a worse reality. Crossing the street toward the monitor, he watched footage looping on a nearby screen: a fireman breaking a bus window, a mother clutching a toddler in shock, a body covered in a silver blanket. He could barely breathe. That could have been him. No, it should have been him. And if not for Nora, for that brief pause in the rhythm of survival, he wouldn't be standing here at all. He stumbled into a nearby coffee shop, found an open seat near a wall socket, and plugged in his dead phone. The screen flickered on. 3 missed calls, all from the same number. Ashland and Brightwell Construction. His would-be employer. With shaking fingers, he called back, expecting to hear a voicemail, or, worse, a cold dismissal. A woman's voice answered on the first ring. "Mr. Mercer, this is Lacey from Ashland and Brightwell. Thank goodness. We've been trying to reach you. I missed the interview," Evan said, already bracing for rejection. "Yes, but that's actually why we called," she replied, voice gentler than expected. "We had to cancel all interviews this morning. There was an emergency. Our CEO, Mr. Marcus Ellison, had a medical situation. His mother wandered off from the hospital, and we've been looking for her for hours." Time slowed. Evan's blood went cold. "Nora," he whispered. "Excuse me?" "The woman you're looking for. Her name's Nora. Nora Ellison. Purple coat, carries a photo of her son." A pause. Then, "Yes. Do you know where she is? She's safe. I walked her to Riverside General myself." What happened next was like a domino line finally tipping over. Within an hour, Evan was standing in a hospital room with soft lighting and that sterile quiet you only hear in ICU wings. Across the room, Marcus Ellison, mid-40s, lean build, 4 in his arm, looked up from his hospital bed. Nora sat beside him, smiling through tears, clutching his hand like it was the last solid thing in the universe. "You're Evan?" Marcus asked, voice hoarse. "Yes, sir. My mother told me what you did. You gave up your shot to help her." "Find me." Evan nodded slowly. "I didn't know who she was. I just couldn't let her be alone." "That tells me everything I need to know. But you don't know anything about my experience." Marcus gave a tired smile. "I don't need to. I can teach construction. I can't teach character." Those words would replay in Evan's head for months. Not just because they gave him hope, but because they rewrote the rules he thought life played by. All his life, he'd been told the world only rewarded those who hustled harder, pushed faster, chased with blinders on. But here was a man who'd built an empire saying, "I want someone who stops." Then came the kicker. "The job's yours, Evan. Comes with a signing bonus. Should be enough to help with whatever's weighing." "You down?" Evan blinked hard. "You have no idea." "I don't need to. But I figure a fresh start never hurt anyone." 3 months later, Evan stood in the doorway of a small but warm 2-bedroom apartment with laminate floors that didn't curl at the edges, light fixtures that didn't hum ominously, and a front door that actually locked. Claire was unpacking a box labeled Kitchen Essentials, laughing as she held up a cracked mug that somehow survived their old place. Emily, their daughter, was in her own room, carefully hanging up dresses in a real closet instead of folding them into milk crates. There were no eviction notices on the table, no notices of past due balances in the mailbox. Just the smell of new paint, the hum of a working fridge, and the sound of his family breathing easier in Evan's wallet, folded neatly next to his. New company ID badge was a creased, stained piece of paper, the eviction notice from 3 months earlier. He kept it not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything, and how quickly that trajectory had changed, because of a stranger. Because of a choice, most people would call it luck. Some might say fate. But Evan had a different word for it now: alignment. A moment when your values collide with your actions in such a pure way that something bigger than you takes over. Because in that sliver of time when he could have boarded the bus, could have turned away, could have told himself his problems mattered more, he chose compassion. And somehow, the world answered. Marcus didn't just give Evan a job. He gave him a career path. Within weeks, Evan was promoted to site coordinator. His team respected him, not because he barked orders, but because he showed up early, stayed late, and never asked someone to do something he wouldn't do himself. He built trust like he once built scaffolding, layer by layer, bolt by bolt. Nora-sweet. Wandering Nora called every Sunday evening just to check in. To Emily, she became Grandma Nora, the only grandparent who ever taught her how to bake molasses cookies or told her stories about ration books and rotary phones. Evan didn't just save her that day. In a very real way, she saved him too. But here's the part they don't write into fairy tales. Even when things go right, doubt lingers. Evan often replayed that morning. The wet shirt, the broken faucet, the missed bus. He still sometimes asked himself, what if I'd just gotten lucky? But the truth always came back clearer. He wasn't lucky. He was tested. And he passed, because that's the thing people forget about tests. They rarely show up with scantrons and pencils. They show up in the form of a confused old woman, a ticking clock, and the weight of a future you're desperate to save. And they ask not, "Are you smart enough?" but "Are you human enough?" The lesson wasn't just about kindness. It was about slowing down, about recognizing that the race we think we're running to status, to success, to some image of what we think life should be often leads us right past the very people who need us most. Evan didn't win despite helping Nora. He won because he helped Nora. And what he learned the hard way is that failure isn't always failure. Sometimes it's redirection. A detour that looks like a disaster but turns out to be the only road worth taking. One Saturday morning, while cleaning out an old backpack, Evan found the business card from that day. It had a coffee stain across the corner and the smudge of dirt from his hands. He stared at it for a while before tucking it into a frame beside a photo of his family and another of Nora and Emily baking together. Then his phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. New project. You're running it. I trust you. Let's build something great. Evan smiled, not because of the promotion, but because he finally understood what it meant to build something that lasts. Months passed. The seasons shifted. Evan settled into his new rhythm: early mornings on job sites, quiet dinners at home, weekend park visits with Emily. Life hadn't become easier. It had become earned. That was the difference. The chaos that once drowned him had softened into background noise. Now he didn't wake up to dread. He woke up with purpose. Still, that morning never left him. Not entirely. It lived in the way he paused at crosswalks to help elderly neighbors with groceries. It surfaced when he kept an extra phone charger in his bag just in case someone else needed it. And it echoed every time he saw a bus pull away from a curb, silent, humming, full of strangers headed somewhere important. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Evan sat by his window with a mug of tea, watching the city breathe. Claire was reading on the couch. Emily was asleep, her lamp still glowing through her bedroom window. And Evan, for the first time in a long time, felt stillness. Not the kind that comes from nothing happening, but the kind that comes when enough has happened for you to finally understand. His phone rang. It was Nora. "Treasure," she said, using the nickname she'd given him after mishearing his name the first week they met. "Marcus told me about your promotion. You're project manager now. I always knew you had it in you." He laughed. "Thank you, Nora, but I should be thanking you." "No, sweetheart. You changed my life that day. You reminded me that this world still has good people. People who stop when others just pass by." After they hung up, Evan sat in silence for a long while. He thought about all the people who'd stepped over Nora that day. All the ones who told themselves, "I don't have time," or "someone else will help." And he wondered if they'd ever know how close they came to missing their own moment. That's the tricky thing about fate. It rarely introduces itself in grand cinematic ways. It shows up in worn coats, in trembling voices, in small windows of time that demand we choose, not between good and evil, but between good and good enough. Evan had learned that the right choice often doesn't look like a win. Sometimes it looks like a mistake, an inconvenience, a missed bus. But what if every single one of those delays that morning, his dead phone, the broken faucet, the missing keys, the rude clerk, even his dying battery. What if they weren't coincidences? What if they were corrections? We chase certainty. We chase plans. But life whispers a different rhythm, and sometimes you don't hear it until you stop running. So what do we take from this? That helping a stranger might save more than one life. Sure, that a single act of kindness can reroute your future? Absolutely. But the real takeaway, the one that lingers long after the story ends, is this. When you help someone else find their way, you often discover exactly where you're meant to be, and the most important crossroads of your life. They rarely announce themselves. They show up disguised as a lost old woman holding a photograph. As a bus pulling up at the worst possible time. As a morning that falls apart, only to stitch your life back together in ways you never imagined.